Hi everyone, welcome back again. This is Kunal Bothra. Yet another interesting day for the markets. We started off with some bit of hope that maybe today's day could be a carry forward of the recovery of yesterday. We were trading with a decent bias for the first half an hour, first 1 hour, first couple of hours. But then I think what followed post that was something which disappointed I think most of the traders that finally recovery कब आएगी और एक stable bounce back कब आएगा. So we are in that zone where the bounce backs are very feeble, and the bounce backs they don't last for too long. But then today, yet again, like what we've done over the series of the previous discussions on our YouTube live, is we are presenting yet another an interesting set of data points. So remember that if you join for the first time on our YouTube live, you would probably find a lot of things as a carry forward of our previous discussions from the YouTube lives, because that's where we tend to take our thought process. So if we were looking at a certain set of charts, certain set of parameters, then we would want to just about carry forward those parameters. And like what we do, one interesting aspect, for today. So I've covered a very interesting chart, and that chart actually is very interesting. I'll just maybe throw some light over here on what the chart, generally, feels like. Because there are times when we've seen COVID corrections, there are times when we've seen the Russia-Ukraine correction. So every correction has some sort of news flow, some sort of event attached towards it. But then there comes a point where the markets become so attractive that maybe going out of the market at that point of time or raising extreme amount of cash at that point of time is generally not considered to be a good strategy. So, what is that point in the market? Okay, what is that indicator in the market? What is that level in the market? We'll discuss that. Maybe we'll give some higher time for that particular indicator, and then we'll discuss around that particular indicator what is the current market setup, and if the markets are likely to bounce back, what is our expectations, the best case scenario where we are expecting the markets could probably stabilize and come into a bounce back mode. So, with a hope that finally the markets may stabilize and we could be looking at a steady recovery, let's begin our today's conversation. Again, an urge to all of you that like what we do every time, you guys can share. Should I will not say care can, but you guys should share, like as well as subscribe to the channel if you guys haven't. Let's discuss today's interesting topic, that whether the market indicators are oversold, whether the valuations are overbought. Now, I'm not a fundamental guy, so for me to discuss about valuations is a bit tricky, of course. Is my screen black by any chance? No, right? Okay, guys. So you guys can see the screens. Perfect. So today's discussion is: are the market valuations still overbought, or are the market valuations oversold? Are the technicals oversold? And are the positives greater than negatives? And what is that one factor which helps us understand that what could be the bottom or the fathom the extreme deep correction or a corrective level for the markets in terms of parameters? Correct. सो एक बहुत इंटरेस्टिंग कहावत शायरी याद आती है कि सुबह मार्केट ने वादा किया कि शाम तक बेवफा हो गया, जब लगा था ब्रेकआउट मिलेगा वो डिप में दफन हो गया. So I think this is the sum and substance or the long and short of how the market reaction has been today. I ensured that the color is red because it gels with the Valentine Day's data. Because tomorrow is the Valentine's Day, and apparently what the history has shown is that generally 7 out of 15 or 16 times the markets have actually closed into slight flattish kind of a bias. So the range is around 0.3 to 0.5% broadly for the index. There is one sector which apparently closes with a negative bias, and that's almost like I think there's an 88% probability over the last 10 years when we analyze the data. Do you know what that sector is? Do you know which sector actually gives a negative return on the Valentine's Day if it's a working day, of course? Write it on the comment box and I'll let you know by the end of this interesting YouTube live. So we'll start off first with the the overall intraday movement of the markets. Now what's actually happening is that the Nifty is getting stuck into this 450 odd point range. So broadly 22,800 is acting as a support. Now if I can just go back to the chart of the Nifty, this is the Nifty chart. As you can see that we went through a double dip. This is a double bottom test. So पहली बार हमने 22,800 के नीचे तोड़ा, 22,786 का हमने लो मारा इंडेक्स पे. We went up higher. We retested the 50 DMA. This is the blue line which you can see, the 50 DMA for the index. This also apparently coincided with the major trend line resistance. So as you can see, so I just joined this the first major resistance, which was on 27th of September 2024, joined it to this particular major point where the markets reversed, and here it coincides exactly. So there are two major resistance points which originated for the markets here, 23,800 thereabouts, 50 DMA as well as the trend line resistance. Okay, both of them. That's why it became very difficult for the Nifty to scale past or cross above those levels. और जनरली क्या होता है ना, जब मार्केट एक बेरिश मूड में होता है, आई डोंट नो इफ आई कैन यूज दैट वर्ड बेरिश, but if the markets are into a bit of a negative mode, then we generally expect that these resistances are very difficult to scale past. And we also believe that when there are cluster of resistances like moving averages, trend line, previous supports acting as resistances, etc., indicator resistances, there are slew of factors which we look at. When there are cluster of resistances which come together, we expect that the markets gradually take a pit stop over there, they cool off, and then they try to make a comeback. Now on the way up, now assuming if we bounce back over here, the first set of resistance which we scale past is 23,600 mark. Now assuming that over the next say 3-4 days, if the Nifty moves up higher, then this is the first level of resistance which the markets have to scale first. So now the resistance is not 23,800. Now the resistances have come down and we are at 23,600 mota moti as a resistance for the Nifty. So just remember this data point very clearly, because in the series of the bounce back, if you get a chance which is a little bit early, when the markets are showing you a confirmation that there is a potential trend reversal, then it's all the more advantageous for all of you guys who are looking to enter the trade setup for the index. Now we come back into this intraday mode for the Nifty. Now what's actually happening is that there are two zones where the selling has been aggravated. Now I don't know if you guys are following me on Twitter, but if you are, then I think almost a couple of weeks back I'd mentioned that generally हमने देखा है कि वो constant sell mode में आ जाते हैं, and जहाँ पे whatever the level of the Nifty is during the day, we expect or we see the markets to grind and fall lower. The first half an hour to first 1 hour for the index, which means 9:50 9:20 से 10:15 10:20 के बीच में, generally we see that if the selling, so if the buyers are not confident enough, then we expect that the first half an hour to first 1 hour is where you see an intense selling in the indices. This is the Nifty chart, intraday charts. This is yesterday. This is around the first half an hour to first 1 hour. In fact, अगर आप historical context देखो, as I mentioned, if you look at my previous tweets, you will find this that the data correlates and rhymes with the previous historical time zones for FIIs. Again, then the mid part of the session, तो उसके बाद में जितना भी bounce करेगा during the day, so this actually becomes a good territory where you can start building long positions. So अगर आपको intraday call options लेने हैं, you want to trade certain strategies, you want to be on the buy side, etc., then this generally becomes a fertile ground where you can look to start entering your intraday positions. And generally we've seen somehow that in the mid part of the session, somewhere around 1 o'clock, 1:15 approximately, is where there is a second round of selling. Now the second round of selling generally stops in the middle part of the territory of whatever the scale is. So assuming, say for an example, if this was 23,000, this was 22,800. Then the midpoint of this is approximately at 22,900. So for that's a rough example, which means that in this leg of correction, and we've seen this historically also, that the market somehow come at least to the midpoint of this, in this case a 200-point correction. Here we saw the Nifty moving from 23,100 towards 23,000 or sub 23,000, which means in this leg of the market, first initial 15-20 minutes of correction, we saw the Nifty falling by 100 to 150 points on an intraday basis after opening up on a slight higher note. Now, when the correction happened for the Nifty, we came back at least to the midpoint of this corrective zone, which means from here the chances are very much high that if the intraday selling starts, then the Nifty comes back at least to the midpoint of the starting zone. So this could be an interesting play for anyone who's looking at those intraday swings on the index, because बहुत important होता है. Generally क्या होता है, if you are an intraday trader or if you are trying to build positions even as an investor, then in this phase of the market you will see your position scaling higher. You will see M2M profits, you will see a lot of positives in your portfolios building up, etc. But surprisingly and somehow somewhere over here after 12:31ish, approximately, we see the numbers falling drastically. तो निफ्टी तो यहाँ पे सिर्फ गिरता है 100-200 पॉइंट from the highs, but the stocks and the selling of the stocks happens in a very severe manner, right? That's what we observe on a regular basis. So all you have to do is just understand that these are two time zones where you must need to reduce your trading drastically, because generally the first assumption is that if the markets are reversing, let me try and act a little bit more adventurous and go contra. But contra trading in this leg starting over here may actually not be a good strategy. So just be a little bit careful when you're looking to trade contra, at least on the buy side when the markets are falling on an intraday basis over here. So the best zone if you're a bull is this first, maybe after the first half an hour, first 1 hour, where the time zone is approximately 10:30 to 12:30 types. That's the best zone for you to look at intraday buy trades if you are looking at index as such. Then we come to the chart which we were discussing earlier, and I think over the next 1 or 2 weeks I would try to repeat the charts, because this becomes a very interesting confluence point for us. We were discussing that in the previous RBI policy of 2019, when the first rate cut cycle started off, we've seen that there was almost like a 7 to 8 days of consecutive sell-off which happened, red candles for the index, before the index started to move up higher. So far, if we take this day of RBI rate cut, so far we've seen almost 6 days of negative candle, which means potentially, in case if there is something negative which is likely to happen in terms of red candles, there could be at max maybe 2 bearish candles which could still be at play. But the only good part about the market setup right now is that we formed a very classic hammer formation. This is a brilliant hammer chart for the Nifty. So if I can come back to the Nifty chart, yes. So as you can see, this is a very classic hammer kind of a formation on the Nifty. This with double bottom on the Nifty indicates that the markets have finally found some bit of stability at 22,800 mark. So there is a very strong likelihood that the markets ideally should not break below this 22,800 levels. Okay, and then the 2 days of bounce back. What we need to see is that if this high is crossed, because ये सबसे आखिरी bearish candle है markets के लिए. Bearish है because इसकी body जो है वो extreme negative है. अगर हम ये high को cross कर जाते हैं, that's 23,400. That's the first sign of confidence that bulls are getting stronger. So if we close above this level, the first major bearish candle, then that's the first indication that the markets are finding its feet back again. So just remember this particular aspect in terms of the intraday charts for Nifty, right? Generally we expect that generally after a market correction हमको ऐसा लगता है कि शायद market immediately V-shape recovery करता है. But I always believe that markets, after a major turbulence, the ship first stabilizes and then it starts to gain momentum. What should matter is that the water beneath the ship, it starts to stabilize. So from being extremely turbulent or violent, it starts to become more, calm. So right now we are in the territory where the ship is trying to stabilize. The major turbulence period seems to be out. The groundwork is becoming positive, and that I believe could probably lead to the markets at least stabilizing. Now, if we stabilize, and as I said, the surrounding environment and news flow starts to become positive, that's where I would believe that the markets would start to gain decent momentum. Now, there is another chart which is also indicative that the mid cap end of the market now starts to become a tad bit more attractive. So this is the Nifty mid cap 50 index chart, and this is the RSI chart. Now we see that whenever the RSIs start to form a higher low, in this case, and the index forms a lower low, we call this as classical divergence. ट्रिपल डाइवर्जेंसेस आर जनरली कंसिडर्ड टू बी वेरी रेयर, और जनरली जब ट्रिपल डाइवर्जेंसेस आ जाता है तब उसके बाद एक्सपेक्टेशन होता है दैट द इंडेक्स बाउंस बैक्स टू एटलीस्ट द स्टार्ट पॉइंट ऑफ दिस रैली. नाउ इन दिस केस, for example, over here, the Nifty Midcap Index, the RSI made a higher low, the prices made a lower low, and then based on that divergence setup, and the moment the RSI started to curve up or move up higher, we saw the mid-cap index also moving up higher. So this becomes a stage where the market gets into a phase of a rally. Now this is where we are in terms of a setup for the index. The RSI is making higher lows and the price is making lower lows. So which means that the prices are falling but the markets are gaining more strength. तो बोलते हैं ना, बार बार टेस्ट कर रहा है, बट एक ऐसा पॉइंट आता है जहां पे RSI strong हो जाता है, and then RSI takes the charge. It becomes a leading indicator. So from being a lagging indicator, it starts to become a leading indicator. So this could actually be a point. Now, all we need to see is that if there is a start of a slight bend over here, if there is a slight curvature of trend on the upside, that's where I would believe that a confirmation of divergence comes in for the Nifty Midcap Index. But the question over here is that, what happens in this case where the markets are into a bottom, and whether the valuation bottom has happened or not, because the premise of the index correction has been that markets are overvalued, fundamentals are etc. on the higher note, and markets have to cool off on a valuation note. So the Nifty is at 23,000 mark, but don't you feel that the stocks are at actually 19,000 levels, right? Why do we feel so that the markets are at 19,000 levels and maybe below that also? The next chart over here actually throws in one of the best lights and the best chart which you need to observe when the markets start to get into a sharp corrective mode and when major bottoms happen for markets. That's the PE chart, the trailing PE chart for the Nifty. Now we'll spend some time over here. Now, these are price levels for indices over the last, or the blue chart which you can see. The blue chart is the trailing PE chart for the Nifty. Now, over the last 2 decades and more, there has been one range for the P ratio where the markets have become extremely overpriced, right? And this was apparently a zone where the markets eventually topped out. Topping out is not a process of 1 day or 2 day. It's a process of maybe few weeks and maybe few months also at some point of time. But you need to identify the zone where the markets become topping out, or they become extremely overvalued. In this case, whether it's in 2000, whether it's in 2008, whether it's in 2019, where we were, the markets were into a zone where the trailing P ratio for the Nifty was around 28, 29. Now, where are we right now in the, the P ratio chart for the Nifty? This dotted line is what you can see. Can you see this dotted line? This is the median line, which means this is the balanced line. यहाँ पे आके जनरली मार्केट में जो करेक्शन का स्टीम होता है वो थोड़ा सा ड्रॉप डाउन हो जाता है. So you can see many a times when the correction happens on an intra or within a trend perspective, the markets somehow closer to that 20 or sub 20 mark or this median line, the correction cools off and the markets come back into a value territory. Now, the other aspect is also very interesting that in normal phases of market correction, normal in the sense like not COVID and not like Lehman crisis or subprime crisis and the dot-com bubble, etc., etc. In normal phases of the market crisis, we've seen that 18 to 19 as a zone has acted as a major support in terms of the valuation comfort. Like right now, the premise which is building up is that markets are overvalued, right? And markets have to correct. India is overvalued. Indian stocks have to correct. So, which means we are currently at a zone where the P ratio is at 20.5. We were at 24, 25 levels just about recently in the September month 2024. We've come back to 20.5, which means max on the downside if in case there is some event like some news flow which comes all of a sudden, then this could apparently be a zone where you should look to start going into a contra buying mode for your portfolios, or look at maybe averaging out, etc., whatever strategy you want to adopt. So we are in that zone. We are about to enter into that zone where the markets are would probably come into a major oversold category. Now, why did I say that the markets have come back into that zone where Nifty is at 23,000, but the indicators are, or the prices are almost at 19,000? Because apparently these two lows, if you can see the mouse where I am moving the mouse, these two lows which happened on the Nifty, this was in November 2023 and this was maybe slightly prior to that, June 2023 if I'm not wrong. These were the lows where the PE ratio for the Nifty was around 20.5, just mota moti 20.5, and the level of the Nifty was 19,000 and 16,000. So, in terms of, are you getting my point? So, in terms of the price levels, the Nifty is at 23,000, but the valuations or maybe the prices in the mid caps and small caps, etc., they have come back to their 2019, 2023 kind of levels over here, right? That's why the pain in the market seems to be a lot more exaggerated. So right now is where I believe that in terms of the P chart, you've come back into a moderate territory. So we are nowhere in the overbought zone, at least in terms of valuations as well as in terms of prices for the indices. Now, in that scenario, if the market starts to move up higher, so for example, my our assumption is that if we start to move up higher, which are the set of stocks, right? Which are the set of stocks where you can start to expect a major short covering. The best benchmark to identify which are the stocks which you can start to expect to get into a major short covering mode. So whenever the process of short covering start, that's where you need to identify, right? If you remember, I think last week we were discussing that how our relative charts are indicating that private banks and financial services are the ones where there is major leadership quality. I hope you guys agree with me over here, right? Last week we were discussing this point that financials and private banks are the two key sectors and indices where you should see a stronger degree of outperformance. And we also mentioned one stock, which was, and today that stock was up some 3 4 percentage points. I think it had come back to 1990, 1980 or 2000 levels approximately. You know the name of the stock which you mentioned, where there was a relative strength which was shown. That was of course Kotak Bank. So always remember, prices will start to indicate first that the trends are reversing. News flows will always come later. है ना? News flows, events, etc., they will always come later. So all you have to do is start to understand that price will give you the first indicator, and when the price starts to reverse on the positive side, there is a stronger likelihood that the events, the news flows, etc., will start to become positive for that particular stock or a set of stocks. So now we are discussing a point where, in case if the markets starts to reverse, okay, and there is a wave of short covering. So I have taken two baskets. The left hand side is what you can expect or what you can see are stocks which are fallen significantly. This is the Nifty 50 basket. We've done this exercise for mid cap as well as the small caps. If there is a wave of short covering, which are the set of stocks where the shorts could be covered significantly? Okay, which means that these stocks have fallen down into an extreme. Like for example, Tata Motors is down 25% from its 200-day moving average. Coal India, Power Grid, these stocks are supposed to be very low beta stocks. Even these stocks have fallen more than 20% from their respective 200-day moving averages. Asian Paints, Hero MotoCorp, I think these stocks have seen consistent and constant downside for themselves. And then these stocks are, I think, if I'm not wrong, for Hero MotoCorp, we've seen almost like 14 weeks of negative price action out of the last 17 weeks. So 17 हफ्तों में से लास्ट हमने 14 वीक्स का नेगेटिव प्राइस एक्शन देखा है हीरो मोटोकॉर्प पे. एनटीपीसी, बीपीसीएल, these are the kind of stocks which have fallen very sharply in this leg of the market correction. So which means that if you are looking out for stocks when there is going to be a likely short covering mode, then all you have to look out for is that stocks which are fallen significantly below their 200-day moving averages. I always believe that 200 DMAs, they are generally like magnets. तो बहुत बार ऐसा होता है when stocks are going up, they go up, go up, go up, they continue to move up higher. Like Trend, for example, a stock which had done exceptionally well. जब 8,000 का था Trend, तब उसका 200-day moving average was around 4,000, 4,500 thereabouts. The stock was at 100% divergence from its 200 DMAs. Now at 8,000, when you tell someone that Trend is overbought, then everyone laughs at you and says, "Arey, nahi, Trend is looking good on charts, and the stock has fundamental reasons, etc., for the stock to move up higher." But then eventually, these long-term averages, they play like magnets. They act like magnets, and stock price, they catch up with these magnets eventually. So which means that if you are looking at selling stocks which are exaggerated with their long-term averages, that's a good strategy. If you're looking at buying stocks when they are almost at 25-35% below their long-term averages, that also eventually turns out to be a good strategy. So अगर आपको 10-15% कमाना होता है in a short to medium term time span, then this generally turns out to be a very fruitful strategy. That's what my experience tells me. All you have to do is just be a lot more patient, because these weak stocks will find all reasons to be more weak, है ना. ऐसे वीकर स्टॉक्स हमेशा उनमें न्यूज फ्लो एक्सेट्रा सब नेगेटिव होती है, बट आपको खाली ध्यान रखना होता है कि इनमें पेशेंस रखना होता है और इनको स्मॉल स्मॉल क्वांटिटी में थोड़ा सा निबल करना होता है. The other set of stocks where there is relatively stronger zone of outperformance. So if you remember Kotak Bank, we highlighted that stock was almost like a 6% to 7% divergence or a strength. Kotak Bank has now come back to the 9% divergence. Bajaj Finance is apparently one of the strongest name. And to judge that when the markets are doing well, तो हम जनरली कैसे जज करते हैं कि आज का दिन अच्छा है या खराब है? You look at the strong stocks and then you look at the weak stocks. If the strong leader stocks, they move higher, there is a strong degree of confidence that markets are coming into a bullish bias again. Let's take example. Today Bajaj Finance was up, Bharti Airtel was up, Kotak Bank was up, Bajaj Finserv was up, and I think even JSW Steel, at least till some part, was trading with a positive bias. Now when you have out of 10 stocks, if you have 5, 6 or 7 strong names which are up, they say by margin of 1%, 2%, 3%, then we say that it's a market which is more tilted towards the leaders, and eventually these leaders will lead the trend on the upside. But what happens, on days when the weaker stocks starts to rally? When the weaker stock starts to rally, then we expect the markets to be into a short covering mode, right? सो हर दिन एक अलग टिल्ट होता है मार्केट का, हर दिन एक अलग फ्लेवर होता है मार्केट का. All we try to do is just identify that which are the stocks which are leading and moving up higher, and which are the stocks which are lagging or falling lower. So there could be a day, for example, that maybe Bajaj Finance and Kotak and Bharti Airtel, Bajaj Finserv, etc., out of the top 10 stocks, maybe top 7 names are actually negative. Most of the times when that happens, the setup for the Nifty generally becomes negative for that day. Okay, just identify, track this pattern. You will see classical correlations over here. If you guys want the list of stocks from mid caps and small caps, if you have any kind of stocks which you were looking to average out, etc., etc., you can just mail or write in your email ID on the comment box, in the video, and then I'll ask my team to forward you those list of stocks in the mid caps and small caps, just based on pure statistics, that how these stocks are placed. In fact, you would be surprised that many stocks are at 50% divergence from their 200 moving averages. 50% divergence from their long-term averages, and that's generally like a very rare kind of a observation or a treat, okay, for markets and especially for individual stocks. Now we come to a point where what the market tilt is and why do we believe that the market's tilt is more towards the positive side. So what are the positives for the market so far? When we look at the discussion which we had in the previous YouTube live sessions, there is a global bull market which is going on. European markets, most of the European markets, all-time highs. US markets closer to an all-time high, especially the Dow. You're seeing strength across Hang Seng. You're seeing strength across few more emerging markets. The second premise is the falling interest rate regime. If you've seen our video on RBI policy and the impact on Nifty, we've categorically said that when RBI starts to do that rate cut, it is not one-off rate cuts. It's a start of a cycle of a rate cut which happens. There is no major tax burden, fortunately, in this policy. In fact, there were a lot many tax incentives which you've seen on the budget day. The oil prices have started to fall. I am sure you guys must have seen that the Brent crude has started to ebb off to 74, thanks to the cooling off of tensions between Russia and Ukraine. Then you have vigilant policymakers. That I believe is a very important, because remember, I think today Sri Narendra Modi is already in discussions with POTUS Donald Trump, where the discussion is going to be more on tariffs related. So which means policymakers like RBI came out with the rate cut, FM came out with the tax incentives. So the policymakers are alert. They are very vigilant over here, and they know that the markets require these doses of positivity for the economy to start lift off. So which means that there should be more intervention on the positive side from the policymakers going into this market. So that indicates that there should be more support from the policymakers front going forward. The the biggest data point which we've seen is the very rare instance that we are into the fifth consecutive negative month. Only once in the previous history, last 25 years plus history for the Nifty, we've seen 5 consecutive negative months. And उसके बाद बहुत ही रेयरेस्ट ऑफ द रेयर सिनारियोज होता है जहां पे मार्केट रिमेन्स टू बी नेगेटिव, राइट? हम कहते हैं 2 sigma event, 3 sigma event. I think if I can probably put this, I will put this as more of 3.5 to 4 sigma event, that the Nifty is into a fifth consecutive negative month. Ideally, Nifty closes into a positive month after the 4 negative months itself, which means that the probability is extremely high that the Nifty will start to gain momentum, and that a major bottom could already, or at least over the next 2 days specifically, should be in place. And then comes the slew of technical parameters. You're starting to see strength in banks and financials. The Nifty trailing P, as I said, is nearing those oversold territories. The most important part, I was discussing this yesterday on the YouTube live, that the market breadth indicators are oversold. Sentiment indicators oversold. leverage positions are chopped out, sentiment is extremely negative. आप किसी से भी बात करो, पैसा डालना है मार्केट में या पोर्टफोलियो की पोजीशन क्या है, सब लोग नंबर बताएंगे आपको, 20% डाउन, 30% डाउन, 40% डाउन एंड सो ऑन सो फोर्थ, which means that the capacity to take leverage in this kind of a market is out. Even that's an indicator that markets have come back into a bit of an extreme in terms of the news flow or the event surrounding. The only scare which we have into the market right now are two, which is the Trump tariff scare. Okay, if in case there is any tariff imposition which happens on India or Indian companies, and the second and the more brutal and the more annoying one is the FII selling and the consistent FII selling. But as I said, that there comes a point when the FII selling has to stop and has to reverse. I think we are reaching that stage where the FII selling, the quantum of FII selling is reducing day by day. There is no major build up on the short side, at least on the FNO side. There is just maybe some bit of cool off which happens from the FIIs in terms of individual stance on stocks. And the third part, which I completely disagree, because the valuations are not anywhere closer to overvalued right now because the P ratio has already cooled off. So all of these data points indicate that the negatives are dropping down and the positives, number of positives are increasing. Whenever that happens in a normal market, चलो ये मार्केट की बात छोड़ लो, आप पुराने हिस्टोरिकल मार्केट्स में भी देख लो, जब नंबर ऑफ पॉजिटिव्स बढ़ते हैं और the number of negatives once they start reducing, markets generally start to anticipate the turn and you see a start of reversal of trend. So remember that an end to a trend initially requires just a small bend, like what we showed you on the Midcap and the Nifty index, that we probably could be at a point where the Midcap and the small caps will start to get back into a turnaround mode, especially led by the leadership across the Nifty sectors. That's it from my side. If you guys have any query, I'll be glad to take that. And if you guys have any kind of questions on stock specific front. Okay, so the first question, or the recent one which we have from Alice: could you suggest a construct of portfolio between large, mid, and small cap companies? So as I said earlier, Alice, that generally क्या होता है when markets sell off, when there is turbulence, the initial is that the markets the still wants to stabilize. So in the first factor of stability, the large cap stocks, they would tend to outperform. That's why when you see the list of stocks which we discussed, you will see the likes of Bajaj Finance, Finserv, Kotak Bank, maybe Tech Mahindra, etc., etc. Many of these stocks, Wipro, I think to a larger extent, these stocks will start to outperform many of the other peers, and that's where you need to focus or tilt more towards. जैसे ही मिड कैप्स एंड स्मॉल कैप्स में रिकवरी आती है, उसके बाद में allocate more percentage over there, right? Because the alpha generated over there will be on the higher side. So it's more of strategic. It depends on what market cycle you are. Right now, we are into that zone where you need to be more cognizant towards large caps and maybe less focused towards mid caps and small caps. Okay. Satya Prakash, how good is ITC? Can it outperform the other FMCG names? If you remember, Satya Prakash, yesterday, or I think day before, if I'm not wrong, we discussed the point that from the relative charts, relative strength charts, we've seen that FMCG as an index and auto as an index, these two indices could broadly remain into an underperforming zone for some time, right? As a broader sector call. But banks and financials is where the tilt should be on the higher side. तो अगर आपका banks और financials अच्छा करेगा, तो tilt more towards that. FMCG, and talking of specific name where you mentioned ITC, I don't see any major comeback pretty soon for this stock, at least looking at the chart setup so far. Okay, Rajeshri Dhar has asked about Time Technoplast. I have not seen the chart, Rajeshri. So yeah, so far I think Time Technoplast is holding on to its 200 moving average. 360 is a major support for Time Technoplast. So what you can do is maybe keep 360 as a weekly closing stop loss. If you're looking to trade the stock, 380 is the closing price approximately. So which means your risk reward is attractive. You're looking at a 20 point of a weekly closing correction for closing stop loss for Time Technoplast. If it holds on, then you can look at 440 also as a initial target. But I would suggest closing based stop loss because generally क्या हो रहा है, the stock is very volatile and intraday it tends to fall below 360. So I'm not sure if you're an intraday trader because intraday अगर आप positions रखोगे तो शायद you would be cut down in that phase of volatility. Okay, right. I think if you guys have any questions, we can take that. Till the time, by the time you're writing those questions, I would also, request everyone that you do share and like the video because, like what we do every time, we will try and bring new set of analysis. And trust me, it becomes very difficult to find out new factors on a daily basis, and especially on day when markets are so lackluster. But we believe that hopefully once the market starts to reverse on the upside, we will start to see a lot more positive factors emerging for the markets. Rajan Parashar has asked a question: how is UPL looking on charts? Excellent chart for UPL if you ask me. I would believe that the stock is showing all classical signals of turnaround. In fact, the list which we had for the mid caps, UPL actually stands to be amongst the top 5 in the mid cap list. So that's why we believe that when stocks are into the top 5, top 7 list of stocks in the mid caps, they generally tend to outperform. Okay, Abhinav Chaudhary says, hi, finally caught you live on time in the US. Oh, thank you so much, Abhinav. Lovely. So Abhinav is joining us from US. Abhinav is asking a question. What are your thoughts on PSUs and PSU banks in particular? Extremely disappointing. I think you can read my body language. Extremely disappointing for PSU banks particularly because most of the PSU banks. So we did a relative strength indicator study. We did a relative strength study, we did a ratio chart study, then we did a individual chart study for these stocks. On all fronts, the PSU banking stocks are categorized at an extremely lowest rating scale. So which means that should be the last sector where you should start to expect a turnaround, right? और अगर वहां पे turnaround चालू हुआ तो समझ जाओ मार्केट मतलब एक्चुअली में मेजर बॉटम बना दिया है ना, because PSU banks will be the last ones to pick up pace or momentum. So I would suggest, if you ask me, as of now, as of today, PSU banks are amongst the weaker sectors on all technical parameters. I would suggest to avoid the space as such as of now, as of today. Okay, Abhinav. Dipti Gupta is asking your view on solar industries. I have not tracked solar industries, but it's a relatively illiquid stock. I think, if I'm not wrong, 40,000, 20,000 shares on an average. थोड़ा सा careful हो जाइए ये stock में. Solar industries, as of now, what I can see, Dipti, is that it doesn't look very attractive. The stock is going through a major mean reversion. This is a major mean reversion for solar industries. I'm actually checking this on the weekly chart. The stock, which was at 12,000 or 13,000 levels, is at 8,800 mark. I think there is more correction to come for solar industry. So I would suggest to stay away. Kindly suggest Geo Finance for long term. The best parameter for long term is let the stocks come into a bounce back mode and then show you signs whether it's ready for a reversal. What is the biggest positive for Geo Finance? I'm not saying about the fundamental positive. The only technical positive for Geo Finance is that the stock is at a 30 to 35% divergence from its 200-day moving average. The number बताता हूँ, 200 DMA for Geo Finance is at 326 and the stock is at 226. तो 100 points का divergence है, which means 33% approximately is the divergence of Geo Finance. That is the only reason why, if you have to buy a stock, you will buy. Okay, that is the only reason, because as I said, whenever the markets recover, there should be at least a 10% to 15% move into the stock. But this would not be the leader stock. That's the only catch which you have to understand. तो जितना नीचे जाएगा, 40% का divergence is a best case divergence, so the chart history of course is limited for Geo Finance, but then in the scenario 40% divergence is the best case scenario. I'll give you another example for Geo Finance. जब वो stock demerge होके बाहर निकला था Reliance से, when the stock was at 380 or 390, the 200 DMA for the stock was around 280, right? There was a 115 to 120 point divergence for the stock from its 200-day moving average on the way up. Now that was in April, May 2024. Now to reverse that, the stock took 8 to 12 months 200 DMA तक आने के लिए. So right now when the stock is at 227, don't expect like an immediate 10%, 20% swing. But if you're an investor with say another 6 months to 1 year time horizon, 40% divergences, if you ask me, what would I do? I think it's a steal in terms of price points to enter the stock. I hope you got the gist of what my view is on Geofinance. Chandru. Alice, I'll take your question second. Maybe I think we'll take another few questions. Sudhir Pawar is asking about Keynes Tech view. Again, a stock which apparently has corrected very sharply, 7,800 say 3,800. So almost like a 50% correction for Keynes Tech. I maintained this point last time also, that leaders of the previous rally, they generally don't become the leaders of an immediate basis. So somehow they come into a zone where these stocks may underperform. So if you are expecting that Keynes will perform like what it did in 2023-24, then you could be in for some bit of disappointment. So you can buy these stocks on the fundamental or on the technical basis, but keep your quantity a bit more lower and don't buy this all out. Wait for these stocks to keep on drifting lower and lower. So both staggered quantity, staggered way mein buy karo, it'll be a better strategy for a stock like Keynes. NTPC or Tata Power, which are the strong names which have corrected heavily, which one is the strong bet for the next 1 year or 2 year? Very difficult to say which will be the strong bet. We'll need to see how the charts emerge. But Tata Power has done reasonably well, and I think from 40 rupees or 45 rupees, the stock went to 500 thereabouts. From 500, it is now sub 400 mark, 380 last minute dekha tha, I remember. NTPC has also gone through a 40% correction, 30 to 40% correction. So price wise, both these stocks are placed relatively like equal. But then maybe I think on a time wise basis, you might probably expect NTPC to be a slow, steady mover. Tata Power could be a fast mover in that aspect. Okay, any other questions, or we can look to wind up? So Sunday we are having this webinar that's on YouTube Live again, where we are discussing that how should you position in terms of your portfolio? Should you be more tilted towards large caps, mid caps, and what are the historical parameters and the statistical parts of the analysis which helps you make that decisions? Okay, so we'll discuss all that on Sunday. If you guys have any queries, you can leave it on the chat box. And as I said, if you guys require the PPT, or if you require the data in terms of which stocks are at what kind of divergences from the long-term averages, then we can maybe add you back to the list of reports which we send out daily to our on the free basis to our clients. So that's it from my side, guys. See you next time on the YouTube Live. Tomorrow, I'm not sure whether I'll be able to take the YouTube Live, but we'll definitely look to join on the weekend, and especially on Sunday on, I think it's on 16th of Feb, morning 10 a.m., where we'll take on YouTube Live the discussion, or the most interesting discussion, which is how and where should you start to allocate your capital, and whether you should or not. Okay. So with that, that's all from my side. I wanted to say a shairi before I end on the market condition. So I'll end it with that, because market mood इतना dismal है. तो ये बाजार भी एक आशिक है, छलकाता है उम्मीदों का जाम, पर एंड में कह देता है भूल जाओ मेरा नाम. That's what the sum and substances of the markets when you look at this from start to the end. Hopefully, this trend will change, and hopefully, we'll start to see a bend to this downward trend. With that hope, that's it from my side. Thank you so much. Join us back in the next session of YouTube Live. Thank you.